Moving towards our sixth session of this one-week training program, it is our fortune to welcome once again Professor Akbar Husain sir, Department of Psychology, Aligarh Muslim University, as the resource person for the session titled Research Design. Professor Akbar Husain sir has already shared his exceptional knowledge in the very first session. I extend my hearty welcome to you once again, sir, and request you to provide us with your valuable insight. For this session, Professor Akbar Husain sir will be joining us in online mode.
Okay, today's the topic of my lecture is research design. And research design, of course, in which we prepare the design of the research project. So decisions regarding what, where, when, how much, by what means concerning an inquiry or a research study constitute a research design. Now the question is, what constitute a research design? So decisions regarding what, where, when, how much, by what means concerning an inquiry or a research study. So a research design is the arrangement of conditions for collection and analysis of data in a manner that aims to combine the relevance to the research purpose with the economy in procedure. Now the question arises, what is a research design? In this context, I mean, the model what I have prepared, that is the purpose of the statement, setting, techniques, timeline, methodology, measurement, objectives, and analysis method. So, of course, research design is the conceptual structure within which research is conducted. So it constitutes the blueprint for the collection, measurement, analysis of data. As such, the design includes an outline of what the researcher will do, from writing the hypothesis and its operational implications to the final analysis of data. So decision with regard to the designing, the first question is, what is the study about? So the study, suppose if you relate to the discipline of architecture, the study may be about building a design better for occupants. And the next question is, what is the study being made, or why is the study being made? So of course, as we know that the architects talk about the structures, levels, depths, building blocks, and windows. Third question is, where will the study be carried out? It means the surrounding also matters. So our surroundings influence not only the way we think, but our intellectual development. The fourth question, which relates well with the design decision, is what type of data is required. Whether we need a, you may say, quantitative data, or qualitative data, or the data which may be considered as the following the mixed design approach. The fifth question is, where can the required data be found? So it means where this study, or what times of period will study include. So of course, the design or the required data can be found from the architect, or from a civil contractor through interviewing method, and what period of times will the study include? The time period may be 3 months, 6 months, or more than that period. Or what will be the sample design? The sample design, say for example, like 50 people or 100 people study can be carried out, and what techniques of data collection will be used? That is, suppose interview method, uh, and the data is to be collected to the 100 respondent. So how many respondents basically took pains for giving interview, or or how many respondents required comfort zone in the building. So this space being the idea mind initially and took shape just as they wanted, and later residing there, or what does but that does not mean that people why go for ready-made homes. Do not let their creative genes wander out their living areas. And the techniques of data collection will be through questionnaire or interview method, uh, or other certain structured. The questionnaires may be structured or maybe unstructured or semi-structured. And how will the data be analyzed? But what statistical test is to be used to analyze the data? That is parametric test, like in which the observation must be independent and observation must be done from the normally distributed population. Uh, the like it the parametric test like t-test, or analysis of variance, multivariate analysis of variance, or Pearson product moment correlation method, or if it is to be analyzed by non-parametric methods like Kruskal-Wallis analysis of variance, Kolmogorov Smirnov test, Mann-Whitney test. And the last question is, in what style will the report be prepared? So of course, generally we prepare the report in terms of based on the qualitative. Reports is qualitative in nature. The next is the decision or design decision, that is a split. The sampling design, which deals with the method of selecting items to be observed for the given study. So sometimes we frame or generate a number of items. But now the question arises how far those items are relevant and have clarity. So in this context, you may say selecting items, one is required to determine the content validity of the test items. Two, decision is regarding the observational design, which relates to the condition under which the observations are to be made. So this observation, say for example, maybe in terms of buildings, the, or the buildings in terms of the cold or the warm or the silent, as well as the height of the ceiling, that is also to be observed and relate with the weather of the particular area or the city. The third design decision is statistical design, which concern with the question of how many items are to be observed and how the information and data gathered are to be analyzed. So sometimes some of the data, say for example, like um, in some of the questions, the respondents may not give an answer. Say for example, suppose if you conduct a study on 15 individuals. Out of 50, 40 people may report that they are totally satisfied and happy with the design they got from the architect, or they felt that the designer was able to comprehend their need and was able to convert their vision into a spatial design. So in such type of cases, they feel positive energy and happy when at home, and relaxation is maximum in that domain. And the rest 10 may not be satisfied with the end result and felt the architect did not have the vision to read their mental makeup and convert into home that they desired. So this is basically related to that. And the fourth is operational design, which deals with the technique by which the procedures is specified in the sampling. Statistical and observational designs can be carried out. In this context also, statistical and observational design. So statistical, now the question arises about CR 50. Simply statistical in terms of percentage, you can make the difference between those who have reported that they are satisfied and happy with the design and those who have not reported with this. So of course, this is needed. So now the question is, there are certain important features of research design. It is a plan or it is a plan that specify the sources and types of information relevant to the problem. And it is a strategy specifying which approach will be used for gathering and analyzing the data. So it also includes the time and cost budgets, since most studies are done under these two constraints. So a research design appropriate for a particular research problem usually involves the consideration of a number of factors, like the means of obtaining information, how you have obtained the information. Second, the availability and the skills of the researcher and his staff. Third, the objective of the problem to be studied. Fourth, the nature of the problem to be studied and the availability of time and money for the research. So if the research study happens to be an exploratory or formulative one, wherein the emphasis is on discovery of ideas and insights, the research design must be flexible enough to permit the consideration of many different aspects of the problem. But when the purpose of the study is accurate description of a situation or association between variables, the accuracy becomes a major consideration, and the research design which minimizes biases and maximizes the reliability of the evidence collected is considered as a good design. So reliability, consistency of the scores or consistency of trying or implementing a design. So studies involving the testing of a hypothesis of a causal relationship between variables require a design which will permit influences about causality in addition to the minimization of bias and maximization of reliability. So research, there are certain concepts or which the research design must contain. That is a clear statement of the research problem, or procedures and techniques to be used for gathering information, the population to be studied, and methods to be used in processing and analyzing data. So in this case, there is a need for research design. Why there is a need to conduct a design? So research design is needed because it facilitates the smooth sailing of the various research operations, thereby making research as efficient as possible, yielding maximal information with minimal expenditure of effort, time, and money. It has a great bearing on the results, on the reliability of the results arrived. So how far the data what you have collected is small. For example, we need a blueprint, what is commonly called the map of the house, well thought out and prepared by an expert architect. So we need a research design or plan in advance of data collection and analysis of our research project. So the third point with regard to the need for research design, it constitutes the firm foundation of the entire edifice of the research work. That is to say, preparation of the research design should be done with great care, as any error in may upset the entire project. So research design has a great bearing on the reliability of the results arrived, and as such constitute the firm foundation of this entire edifice of the research work. The next point is it holds some importance as a blueprint of a house holds for an architect. So as that means researches, sometimes we conduct researches which do not serve the purpose for which they are undertaken, but rather than they may give misleading conclusions. So that's why it is necessary that thoughtful designing the research project may result the fruitful results. So it is therefore imperative that an efficient and appropriate design must be prepared before starting research operations. So design helps the researcher to organize his ideas in a form where it will be possible for him to look for flaws or inadequacies. The last point is it makes a research efficient by yielding maximal information with the minimal expenditure of effort, time, and money. So, of course, such a design can be given to others for their comments and critical review. So, whatever the design you prepare, it is also to be evaluated or educated by others also. So, in the absence of such course of action, it will be difficult to critique to provide a comprehensive review of the study. The features of a good design, which minimizes biases or it should be flexible, appropriate, efficient, and economical, and maximizes the reliability of the data. So in the case of the reliability, sometimes, so of course, in the case, if you relate with the discipline like an architect, it would be better to use or determine the retest reliability. Then you can maximize. And the another feature is designed with the smallest experimental error. And and designs which yields maximal information. So in practice, it is the difficult task to particular study in a particular group for a given research may have be elements of two or more of the functions of different studies. But I am just pointing out at least these four features of a good designs are required. But sometimes, depending on the study what you conduct, whether exploratory or descriptive or hypothesis testing, the choice of research design may be made in case of a particular study. The availability of time, money, skills of the research staff, and the means of obtaining the information must be given due weightage. While working out the relevant details of the research design, such an experimental design, survey design, and sample design. The important concepts relating to the research design. First is dependent and independent variables. A concept which can take on different quantitative values is called a variable. The concepts like weight, height, income are all examples of variables. The qualitative phenomena or the attributes are also quantified on the basis of presence or absence of attributes. The phenomena which can be quantitatively different values, even decimal points, are called continuous variables. But all variables are not continuous. Like age is an example of continuous variable, but the number of children is an example of not continuous variable. So if one variable depends upon or is a consequence of other variables, it is termed as a dependent variable. Or in simple words, you may say dependent variable is the variable what we study. And independent variable is the variable in which we examine the influence of certain variables on dependent variables. Like say, for example, in the case of architecture, the block design or the positive and negative aspects, colors of the room, open spaces, openings, or lighting, like natural and artificial, or landscapes. So these may be the independent variable which you can manipulate in order to examine or see the influence on dependent variable. The next type of variable is extraneous variable. Independent variables that are not related to the purpose of the study but may affect dependent variable are termed as extraneous variable. Suppose the researcher want to test the hypothesis that there is a close relationship um, between a design of the building and the influence on the pupils' well-being or the healthy society. So in this case, influence of certain variables like the design of the building or the landscape or positive and negative aspects. So that may influence on the well-being of individual. So a study must always so designed that the effect upon the dependent variable is attributed entirely to the independent variable. and not to some extraneous variable or variables. The third type is control variable. One important characteristic of a good research design is to minimize the influence or effects of extraneous variables. The technical term control is used when we design the study, minimizing the effects of the extraneous independent variable. In experimental researches, the term control is used to refer to restrain experimental conditions. Not, say, for example, in designing or in building designing, it is difficult to control or see the influence of such type of variables. The fourth is a confounded relationship. When the dependent variable is not free from the influence of extraneous variable, the relationship between the dependent and independent variable is said to be confounded as an extraneous variables. यानी कि क्या मतलब वो when your study is not free from the influence of the extraneous or some independent variables, then it is difficult for you to give or arrive to the fruitful results and conclusions. The research hypothesis. Next, when a prediction or a hypothesized relationship is to be tested by scientific method, it is termed as research hypothesis. The research hypothesis is a predictive statement that relates an independent variable to a dependent variable. Usually, a research hypothesis must contain at least one independent and one dependent variable. The predictive statements which are not to be objectively verified or the relationship that are assumed but not to be tested are not termed research hypothesis. So this is the requirement. There should be at least minimum one independent variable and one dependent variable. Suppose if there are two independent variables and one dependent variable, you can analyze the data by using ANOVA. Suppose if there are two independent variables and two dependent variables, then you can analyze the data by use MANOVA, multivariate analysis of variables. And the next is experimental, non-experimental hypothesis testing. When the purpose of research is to test a research hypothesis, it is termed as hypothesis testing research. Almost in most of the discipline, they follow this method. It can be of the experimental design or of the non-experimental design research. The research in which the independent variable is manipulated is termed as experimental hypothesis testing research. Just like independent variable which can be manipulated in the areas of architecture, maybe openings or the ventilation, lighting, that is natural or artificial. And a research in which independent variable is not manipulated is called non-experimental hypothesis testing. For instance, suppose a researcher wants to study whether intelligence affects the reading ability for a group of students. And for this purpose, the researcher randomly selects 50 students or maybe 100 students and tests their intelligence and reading ability by calculating the coefficient of correlation between the two sets of scores. So this is an example of non-experimental testing research. Next is experimental and control group. In an experimental hypothesis testing research, when a group is exposed to usual conditions, it is termed as a controlled group. But when the group is exposed to some novel or special condition, it is termed an experimental group. So of course, the group A can be called as a group. Suppose if there are two groups like group A, group B. Group A can be called as a control group. Group B can be called as an experimental. If both groups that is A and B, are exposed to special studies program like experimental group, then the design which include an experimental group or studies which include both experimental and control. Look at treatments. The different conditions under which experimental and groups are put on usually termed as treatments. जैसे होता है like I will show you some of the designs, pictures of some of the designs later on where I will explain. So in the treatment group, say for example, like suppose if anybody suffer from anxiety, depression, and stress. So what was his condition before the treatment? And when we apply any treatment procedure, like any psychological technique for helping and alleviating the problems of anxiety, depression, and stress, how would the individual respond to that? So, of course, if you want to determine an experiment comparative effect of, say, for example, three varieties of fertilizers on the yield of wheat, in that case, three varieties of fertilizers will be treated as three treatment groups. So similarly, suppose we want to make the design of the building, like how the designer should have or the advise not or plan, or it is the architect whether he received any training after the, say for example, after the completion of the course like BR or not. And the next important concept relating to research design is experiment. So the process of examining the truth of a statistical hypothesis relating to some research problem is known as experiment. For example, we conduct an experiment to examine the usefulness of a certain or usefulness of certain spaces in the house. So of course, the experiment can be of two types. That is to say, absolute experiment and comparative study. Like in which one can determine the impact of certain open spaces on the psyche or the human behavior or the social behavior, and spaces which are not open or there is no ventilation, how does it affect on the psyche or social behavior of an individual? So of course, we undertake comparative experiments when we talk of designs or of experiments. And the last one is experimental units. The predetermined plots or the blocks, different treatments are used, are known as experimental units. So such experimental units must be selected or defined very carefully. So of course, the same thing which I explained just now. Different research design. Exploratory or formulative research. In exploratory and formulative research studies, the major is emphasis on the discovery of ideas and insights. The second is requires inbuilt flexibility. Third, broadly defined research problem is transformed into one with more precise meaning in exploratory studies. Fourth, it includes three methods: the survey of concerning literature, the experience survey, and the analysis of insight stimulating examples. So of course, experience concerning literature, the relevant studies related to the topic which you want to study, and your experience, how far your experience influence on designing or building designing. and sometimes you put or give an insight, stimulating examples with referred to it. The second area is descriptive and diagnostic research studies. Descriptive, it describes the characteristic of a particular individual or group. For example, studies concerned with the specific predictions with narration of facts and characteristics. Second, diagnostic, it determines the frequency with which something occurs or its association with something else. The studies considering whether certain variables are associated or not. Third, the design in both studies must be rigid and not flexible. So of course, in the case of medical sciences, basically, we prefer to conduct studies relating to diagnostic research studies. But in the third area of research design, that is hypothesis testing research studies, is usually conducted in almost or in most of the disciplines. So first, it is also known as experimental studies. And the second one is researcher tests the hypothesis of causal relationship between variables. Third, it requires procedure that will not only reduce bias and increase reliability, but will permit drawing inferences about causality. So these are the different types of research design. So of course, the experience survey in the case of architect, the experience survey also, or those architect who had a practical experience, of course, need problem to be studied. And the object of such a survey is to obtain insight into the relationship between variables and new ideas relating to the research problems. The experience survey may enable the researcher to define the problem more concisely and help in the formulation of the research hypothesis. And this survey may provide information about the practical possibilities of doing different types of researches. The last point, that is to say, in the descriptive and diagnostic research, the design both studies must be rigid and not flexible. Of course, one must give attention to the formulating of the objective of the study, to what the study is about and why is it being made. And the second point under this is for consideration is designing the methods of data collection. What techniques of gathering data will be adopted? Third, selecting the sample, how much material will be needed? Fourth, collecting the data. Where can the required data can be found, with what time period should the data be related? Next, processing and analyzing the data. And the last point is reporting the findings. So basic principles. Now I come to the basic principles of experimental designs. There are three principles: the principle of replication, the principle of randomization, and the principle of local control. So according to the principle of replication, the experiment should be repeated more than once. This treatment is applied in many experimental units instead of one. By doing so, the statistical accuracy of the experiments is increased. And the principles of randomization provides protection when we conduct an experiment against the effect of extraneous factors by randomization. In other words, this principle indicates that we should design or plan the experiment in such a way that the variations caused by extraneous factors can all be combined under the general heading of the chance. For instance, if we grow one variety of rice in the first half of parts of the field and the other variety is grown in the other half, then it is just possible that the soil fertility may be different in the first half in comparison to the other half. If this is so, our results would not be realistic. Principle of local control is another important principle of experimental design. Under it, the extraneous factor known sources of variability is to may vary deliberately over as a wide range as necessary, and this needs to be done in such a way that the variability it causes can be measured and hence eliminated from the experimental error. जैसे हम लोग एनालिसिस करते हैं टू वे एनालिसिस ऑफ वेरिएंस, यानी कि क्या है एक्सपेरिमेंट का 2x2 फैक्टोरियल डिजाइन बनाइए आप, in which you can plan out the different extraneous factors like in the field of architect, like openings or open spaces or acoustics. So there should be certain homogeneous part related to the number of treatments. So dividing into several groups part is known as blocking. So in general, blocks at the levels in which we hold extraneous factors fixed, we can measure a contribution of total variability of the data, means of two-way analysis of variance. अब देखिए important experimental design. First one is before and after without control design. Second is after only with control design. Third is after control with control design. So here I would like to show you some designing, like before and after without control. Test area, level of phenomena before treatment. Say for example, the area where a particular crop is supposed to be sown. Suppose if you test this particular area like a city like an Aligarh or nearby, that is to say, grow the rice, yielding rice. So of course, this particular field or area is not good, no matter whatever the treatment you use. And suppose if you want to test, even that you want to test, you can test it through level of treatment or phenomenon after treatment or treatment effect, that is the y minus x. So this is a before and after without control design. Right? So such type of study sometime we conduct into the clinical setting also, like how a cancer patient responded before chemotherapy and after chemotherapy. The next one is after only one control design. Test area, treatment rules, level of phenomenon after treatment, control area, treatment effect, level of phenomenon without treatment. So after only, yani ke kya, there is no control. We have not controlled any particular variable, just we open it. Particularly, it happens in the case of you may say in designing experiment, but those experiments are, you may say, can be considered as informal designs. And similarly, The third area is before and after with control design. So time period. So sometime in the field of agriculture, when we conduct certain studies between where we can make, suppose if a particular crop is yield for 3 months and another is for 4 or 5 months, how does it affects on the level of phenomenon before treatment under time period 1 or under the time period XYZ. And the control areas may be level of phenomenon without treatment and the level of phenomenon without treatment under and the time period second category. So test area basically you may say in the before and after without control design. In such a design, a single test group or area is selected and the dependent variable is measured before the introduction of the treatment. The treatment is then introduced and dependent variable is measured again after the treatment has been introduced. So the effect of the treatment would be equal to the level of phenomenon and treatment minus level of phenomenon before the treatment. So this design can be represented like this. And the next is after only control design. So in this design, two groups or areas are selected. One is test area and control area are selected and the treatment is introduced in the test area. So the dependent variable is then measured in both the areas at the same time. Yani ki treatment introduced as well as the level of phenomenon after treatment. So treatment impact is assessed by subtracting the value of the dependent variable in the control area from its value in the test area. Like y minus z. So of course this design can be represented like. So the basic assumption in such a design is that the two areas are identical with respect to their behavior toward the phenomena considered. If this assumption is not true, there is the possibility of extraneous variation entering into the treatment effect. However, data can be collected in such a design without the introduction of problems with the passage of time. In this respect, the design is superior to before and after without control design. To you say, it is superior. And the third is before and after with control design. In this design, two areas are selected. That is level of phenomena before treatment and level of phenomena after treatment, that is Y. And the dependent variable is measured in both areas for identical time period before the treatment. The treatment is then introduced in the test area only, and the dependent variable is measured in both for an identical time period after the introduction of the treatment. The treatment effect is determined subtracting the change in the dependent variable in the control area and from the change in the dependent variable. So this design is superior to the above two designs for the simple reason that it avoids extraneous variation resulting both from the passage of time and non-comparability of the test and control areas, but at the same time, due to lack of historical data, time or comparable control, we should prefer to select one of the first two informal designs as is given. अब ये टू ग्रुप सैंपल डिजाइन है अब ये क्या completely randomized block design. तो randomized block design में क्या it involves two principles, that is principle of replication and the principle of randomization of experimental design. It is the simplest possible design and its procedure of analysis is so easy. The essential characteristic of the design is that subjects are randomly assigned to experimental group. अब जैसे हमने दिया like IQ भी दिया है on the basis of very low IQ. So if we have like 82 subjects in very low IQ, 67 subjects in low IQ, 57 average, high IQ 71 and 73. So these are the, you may say, 5 conditions. So by the randomization process, it gives every possible group of subject from a set of opportunity of being assigned to them. So such a design is generally used when experimental areas happen to be homogeneous. Technical, all variations due to uncontrolled extraneous factors are there. अब ये देखिए two group sample randomized design. In a two group sample randomized design, first of all the population is defined and then from the population a sample is selected randomly. Further requirement of this design is that items after being selected randomly from the population be randomly assigned to the experimental and control group. So such random assignment of items to two groups is technically described as a principle of randomization. But this design yields two groups as representative of the population. One is also called Latin square design. So Latin square design is an experimental design very frequently used in agricultural researches. For example, an experiment has to be made through which the effects of 5 different varieties of fertilizers on the yield of a certain crop. So wheat it to be judged. In such a case, varying the fertility of the soil in different blocks in which the experiment has to be performed must be taken into consideration. Otherwise, the results obtained may not be very dependable because the output happens to be the effect not only of fertilizer, but it may also be the effect of fertility of soil. The Latin square design is one where each fertilizer in this example appears to 5 times but is only used once in each row and in each column of the design. अब देखिए ज्यादातर हम लोग यूज ये करते हैं factorial design. Most of the when we need to analyze the data either through ANOVA, that is analysis variance, or MANOVA. देखिए simple control design. In the case of simple factorial design, we consider the effects of 2 factors on the dependent variable. अब देखिए experimental variables are treatment A, treatment B. But when an experiment is done with more than 2 factors, we use complex factorial design. अब ये क्या है? This design is simply known as 2 into 2 factorial design. इसी तरह से आप 2 into 2 into 2 कर सकते हैं, 3 into 4 कर सकते हैं, और 5 into 3 कर सकते हैं. So this is an example of 2 into 2 factorial design. So in this design, The extraneous variable to be controlled by homogeneity is called control variable. And the independent variable which is manipulated is called experimental variable. Then there are two treatments of the experimental variable and the two levels of the control variable. As such, there are four cells, cell 1, 2, cell 3, and 4, into which the sample is divided. So each of the four combinations would provide one treatment or experimental. The subjects are assigned at random to each treatment in the same manner as in a randomized group design. The means for different cells may be obtained along with the means for different rows and columns. The means of different cell represent the mean score. For example, in your case, in the discipline like an architect, you can take a number of areas or number of the independent variable which can affect the behavior of the respondents, like positive and negative, or you may say narrow and open spaces, or lighting, like a natural and artificial lighting. So, row means in the set design are termed main effects. For labels without regard to and this design, we can study the main effects of treatment as well as the main effects of label. So additional merit of this design is that one can examine the interaction between treatment and labels, for which one may say whether the treatment and labels are independent each other or not. So these are the certain designs, or you must say, I discuss, and similarly, um, there may be several illustrations like 4 into 3 simple factorial design, which can include cell 1, 2, treatment group cell 1, 2, 3, treatment cell 4, 5, 6, treatment cell 7, 8, 9, treatment cell 10, 11, 12. So depending on the your problem. Okay, thank you very much. So if you need any clarification,
Any queries from our online participants? Any queries from our offline participants?
there is no doubt. I mean, in the beginning, particularly those who are pursuing the course like BARC, it is they may be at the infancy stage. The MARC students, those who are expected to write the dissertation as well as field project, of course, they can easily understand and they can easily apply to these techniques, because this part is or research design is very important area, which of course help to the people and the researcher in general. That is how the study is to be executed. Nowadays, I mean, this particular discipline is also has some association and with the field of psychology. One emerging branch is architectural psychology. Few years ago, I wrote one article, but I do not remember correctly where I kept it. Otherwise, because the architect or the design of the building or examining the influence of certain independent variables affect on the social behavior or the human behavior in general. For example, in the last lecture I told you earlier, we used to have building like a which are constructed in a horizontal manner. Now we have a vertical. So our uh, space in the soul or in the brain also becomes narrow because of living in the narrow spaces or multi-storied building. Earlier, we used to have more open space. Yeah, yes, Rudra.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir, for your remarkable words.
Okay, thank you.
Any of the queries from our online participants? Uh, Please switch on, turn on your mic.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes,
Yes, you
now
are.
you are Rudra. Now you are on. Now, Rudra,
Sir, actually,
what is your discipline?
sir, I am from IIT Kharagpur, sir, research scholar from IIT Kharagpur.
Okay, okay.
Uh,
Which field? Which field you are working?
Sir, urban
Architect?
planning, sir.
Urban
I'm an
planning.
arch.
Oh, acha, urban
Yes, sir,
planning.
I'm an arch. I have PG from done from NIT Bhopal, and now I'm doing from 1.5 year completed in IIT
Okay.
Kharagpur. Sir, my research question, my researcher is urban governance and
Okay.
how and municipal finance, and my aim is how to enhance the municipal finance, so that our country's in our country's GDP only 1% is municipal revenue is contributing, sir. So how to enhance the municipal economic conditions of a city I was working, sir. So my doubt is
Open.
how to enhance the municipal revenue, sir. How to enhance the municipal revenue so as to contribute to the Indian GDP. So in Indian GDP, only 1% is from municipal revenue. It is contributed to GDP, sir. So how to, sir, my PhD research area should contribute to the country.
But in relation to urban planning, in relation to urban planning.
It's actually in urban local bodies in 18 functions of 18 functions. Urban planning is one area.
Okay. So at the
And
at the initial stage, what you did, did you prepare any structured questionnaire for this?
yes,
What
sir.
is your target sample? What is your target sample?
Sir, actually, research design some different. You taught about different types of research design, like
Yeah, yeah.
exploratory and formulative design.
Yes, like
In
in your case,
uh,
it will be an exploratory.
actually, so what type of taxes? What are the sources to enhance the municipal revenue?
Yeah.
So actually, I think property taxes is contributing 50 to
So
70%.
you are also required to collect the secondary data.
Yes, yes. I already had an interview with some of the municipal finance, some officers also.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what in Andhra Pradesh, what is existing taxes, non-taxes, and assigned taxes I have collected. Sir, my I want a small suggestions from you because it's a very good assessment.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So what type of questions I have to prepare when I'm, what type of methods I have to prepare when I'm
Yeah.
going to, so next month I'm going to meet
So,
Chief Secretary.
yeah. So, Rudra, you are advised to send me some of your research objectives. Okay. So,
Okay, sir.
accordingly, I can suggest you what are the areas which are to be covered,
Thank you so much. Sir. Thank you so much.
I shall also try my level best to write some of the sample questions for you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
And to whom you simply write the title of your research work as well as the objectives.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Then we will.
So
definitely do.
in order to collect the data collection data, what are the methods I have to follow?
Yeah.
How to approach?
So in
Because
brief, So in brief, I will send you. Don't worry.
definitely. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
Any other questions from our offline participants? Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
With this, we came to the end of our day 3 of 1 week training program. I extend my thanks and gratitude to our eminent speaker, our online and offline audience for their kind support and peaceful listening. We'll meet tomorrow at 3 p.m., same place, with more determination and enthusiasm for the upcoming session on this 1 week training program on research methodology and innovative statistical applications. Sorry. Thank you and have a nice evening.